back to She's Constructing It, where we get into electricity. So here I'm going to use my rattlesnake analogy again. A rattlesnake cannot bite you in a bucket with a lid. In the same way, electricity cannot bite you when it's not on. So put it in a bucket and close the lid. So how we do this is we, in general, go to our circuit breaker. That's our bucket, not a light switch. We put a lid on it. That's our electrical tester. If you want to be extra careful with a rattlesnake, you're going to tie that lid on. In electrical, if you want to be extra careful, you're going to use a multimeter to double check and make sure your power is definitely off. We'll show you more how to use all these tools, but I do want to say I have been zapped by 120 a fair bit. It's not fun. I usually do it when I'm mudding drywall with metal drywall tools and I'm around live circuits and forgot to turn them off. 120 is dangerous, but usually just painful and surprising. And mostly I swear a lot. Still, don't mess around. Like saw blades, you can't cut off your fingers if you aren't near the blade. You can't zap yourself if the power is off. So put the snake in the bucket. I mean, step 1, turn off the power. In order to show you what power looks like when it's off, I want to show you what it looks like when it's on. So here I'm taking a faceplate off the light switch. When I use my electrical tester here, with this particular electrical tester, I can't get close enough to the wires to prove if they're live or not. So I'm going to need to actually unscrew this light switch from the wall. Because I know, I can tell my light is on, it's shining on me, and this is the light switch for it, I have live current running through these wires. I'm being very extra careful right here. I'm going to unscrew the front of my light switch with a Phillips and very, very gently pull this out to expose my wires. Now that my wires are exposed, I can use my voltage tester, my little fast electrical tester with the light, to prove that there's actually power in here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Remember, it turns green and it shows green when there isn't any live. And look, live wire, and live wire. I can prove the same thing with a multimeter if I turn it to the volt setting and make sure my decimal points are in the right spot so that I can read 120 volts. There's lots of good online tutorials for how to use a multimeter. And then I'm going to take either end of my leads for testing, and on an outlet like this one that I might want to replace because it's broken, I need to touch one side to the hot side and one side to the neutral. And that should tell me that I have 120 volts. So right here, it doesn't matter which lead I use on which side, I'm reading, roughly 110, 119 volts. I find it useful to try and think of electrical current like water in a pipe. So let's start here at our water pumping station. We fill it up with water and then we want to send it somewhere. So we have our pipe, this is our wires, that our water needs to go through. The first place our water hits a dam that it can't get past is our breaker box for our purposes. So when our breaker box is off, water is stopped, nothing going further. When our breaker box is on, then our water can continue. So now our water continues on. If we have a switch in the circuit, this is acting like another dam. When the switch is off, our water's off. When the switch is on, our water can continue and flow down the pipe. When our water gets to our water wheel here, our water wheel can't turn. The water has nowhere to go unless we give it a return line to the pump station. So we've got our hot line in, that's what our water's been running through, that first pipe. But without a return pipe, we're stuck. Our electrical current can't go anywhere. So this is where our neutral comes in. So this is in general, it's going to be a white wire that we're going to add to our system to return our power back to our pumping station. So our neutral's in and it's going along. Now all of a sudden our water has a path. This means our water can continue, turn the water wheel, power all sorts of things like our wee light there or our outlets, because it has a way to continue flowing, keep the circuit going, and return back to the pumping station. So if you think about your electrical current like water, this can really help when you're trying to remember which wires go where and why. Another element we need to have is we need to have a way to hold up our water lines or keep them from crushing us or hurting us. So think of this like struts holding up a water line. This is essentially our ground line. We always want to have a ground in the system to keep us from getting damaged by electrical current. In the same way, you probably want to have something to keep your water line from flattening you. So our ground line needs to continue all the way through the whole system unbroken or twisted together and connected with wire nuts so that the circuit is continuous and united all the way back to an earth ground or a grounding rod. Dun dun dun! You knew it was coming. This is your building inspector and building department warning. In many places, you may not be able to run all your own electricity as an owner builder. You may need an electrician for this. And even if you are allowed to run your own electricity, if you're doing this for the first time, you should probably at the very least hire an electrician to look over this for you, or really make sure your building inspector double checks your work, because this is stuff that's buried in the walls and stuff you don't want to get wrong. That being said, it's really fun to do, and it's really doable, and you can do a lot as the owner builder. If you own your own building, it's also nice to be able to replace a broken outlet or fix a switch that isn't working correctly. These are not always super complicated. A lot of these can be super simple. And even if you never wire anything at all, understanding how electricity works and some basic terminology can really make you more informed in finding out and following electrical in your own building, and even calling your electrician to help them diagnose what's wrong or give them a clue as to what problems you have in your building. Let's go through those snake in the bucket steps again. Step 1, turn off your power, generally at your circuit breaker, which might be on the outside of the building like this, or it might be on the inside of the building. It might be painted over, but you're going to go ahead and find the breaker that controls your outlet or your switch, and you're going to have something turned on, like a light or something plugged into your outlet, and then when you flip the breaker, you're going to, step 1, make sure the light is off. That seems like a good sign. That seems like we hit the right breaker. Step 2, I'm going to take my little handy-dandy lit voltage tester, and I'm going to run it along the wires. I'm going to make sure none of the wires light up. I'm also, after I check all those wires, I'm going to stick it deep into the box to make sure I have no other live wires entering this box, because sometimes there'll be live wires passing through, and if they are, you want to know about those. Those might not be on the same circuit that the light switch is. After that, if I want to really, really double check, if I want to tie my lid on my rattlesnake, I'm going to use my multimeter, and I'm going to check that way. Great, now you know the first steps of working around power safely. You are ready to go learn some more about how power works and how you're going to use it in your building. Quick introduction to some tools here. You'll need a utility knife, a pair of electrical pliers, some sort of tester to make sure you don't have power, and then ideally an outlet tester. I also generally like a stud finder, which also has an AC or a wiring warning if I'm doing remodeling. Then we're going to need wire, and what we generally use in our area is 12-2. This is 12 gauge wire, and it's got 2 pairs. So when I cut into it, I've got a neutral and a hot wire, black being hot and white being neutral. And then I also have my unshielded ground wire there in the middle. Your ground wire is always unshielded. If I'm working in an outlet box, I want this plastic shielding to come up through the edge of the box to protect my inside wires, but then I want to cut it off so it's not going to interfere with wires inside my box. I'm going to use my electrical pliers on the 12 gauge setting. There's 2 12 gauge marks on my electrical pliers. One says AWG solid and one says AWG stranded. The center of this is a solid wire, not a stranded wire. It's one solid copper wire rather than a lot of little teeny stranded ones. I'm going to go ahead and spin and then strip the shielding off the wire and trim it to length. I'll do that on all the wires I'm connecting. You can use the tip of your pliers to make a loop or to twist wires together. You can also use different pliers for this. I personally use different pliers for that. So let's look at another 12 gauge wire here. Let's look at 12-3. Confusing thing in wire numbers. The higher the number, the thinner or smaller the wire. So a 14 gauge is smaller than 12 and can carry less electricity, whereas a 10 gauge is bigger than 12 and can carry more electricity. It's a thicker wire. In this 12-3, we have a black hot wire, an unshielded copper ground, a white neutral, and a red hot line. You would use 12-3 if you wanted switches on 2 ends of the room. We'll go into these details later when we look at outlets and switches. Let's take a quick look at some basic switches and outlet. This is the type of switch you use when you want only one switch in the room. It's got 2 gold screws, so I've got 2 hot lines, the hot line coming in for power and the hot line going to my light. And then I've got a green screw to ground my switch. So that's just a simple switch, on-off, on one side of the room. If I want to turn on my lights from either side of the room, say have a switch on either side so I don't have to walk back and forth, I'm going to have hot screws, 2 hot screws on one side and another hot screw on the other. And then we'll explain that when we look at three-way switches. And then I'm going to have a little ground screw to make sure that switch is grounded. In my outlets, I'm going to have 2 silver screws on one side and 2 gold screws on the other. I like to think of it as gold is always more important than silver. So gold is my hot line coming in, and silvers are going to be my neutrals. Whereas in my light switches, we'll show later, my neutrals are going to be bonded and out of the way. This is a ground fault circuit interrupter switch. These are really important if you're putting your circuits in wet locations, and in many codes you have to put them on the start of every run. We'll go into that later as well. But again, look, I've got a silver and a gold screw, and then I've got this very important tag that will have every outlet comes with directions on how you should wire it and a wiring diagram. So you'll be able to read that.